Hello everyone and welcome to the 7th episode of our React tutorial series. Now in this video we are going to be going over the concept of child props. Now up until now we have basically been writing our code as follows. I will quickly open up our app.js. Look at our components here. We have been writing them like this. Now this is like a self-closing tag. It was originally part of XHTML, similar to like if you do an IMG tag, an image tag, you have to close it, or you should close it with a /. But there is a concept called child props in React, and that basically allows us to do something along the lines of this, where we can actually have the tag close, and then we can put hello, or we could even, put another, we could put whatever we want in between this. And I'm going to go ahead and write this code here, and we're going to get to work here in this video. So I'm going to start by quickly cding into our folder. And running npm run start to go ahead and start up this whole system. Once that is done, it'll open up our web page here on the right. And you will see that this isn't going to do much right now. You'll notice it still says increment 0. Literally nothing has changed. There's still this increment. I'll remove this increment button just so you don't get confused. There's one increment button and then one toggle button. Toggle button still works, and then increment button still works. Except you see I put a hello in between, but that doesn't show up anywhere, because we are not handling the child props properly in our component. So it's literally discarding this. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and explain some concepts of what child props are. React documentation provides this page to kind of explain it. To begin, they kind of talk about the whole debate, composition versus inheritance. This is a very general computer science topic. It's not React specific, but basically there are two schools of thought, composition, or there are two methodologies. Composition is basically you create things by composing different components. Basically, for example, a person is composed of a brain, a body. So like they're composed of two pieces, and then, a body is composed of, your torso, your arms, your legs, and so on. Basically, versus inheritance, which if you are not familiar, inheritance in code is generally like when you do classes, you will have a class that inherits from or extends a different class depending on what programming language you're using. And basically, it'll get all the functionality of the superclass or the parent class, and it can add even more functionality. Versus composition, which is like a class that has a bunch of different pieces to it that, like, you can take and give, and basically it's a modular design. Sorry, that was just a little bit of background on composition versus inheritance. But in React, we use composition with something called child props, and this allows us to make our components a lot more versatile. And basically, it allows you to create components that can do a lot of stuff and can do it in a way that you can basically add whatever pieces you need and don't add whatever pieces you don't need. So in essence, child props are basically using the props as we have previously used. You'll see that if we open up one of our components here, like the color button, we are passing in props here into the component itself, the function. And basically you can say props.children, and that will in essence put whatever's inside this children here, which right now it's a hello, but it could be a paragraph that says hello. It could be anything really. In fact, we'll actually leave it at as this paragraph here. And by adding this props.children, you can basically put whatever's inside here. And this is the basis, like this whole concept of composition forms the basis of a lot of more advanced topics in React. And by the way, at this point, if you have followed along the series, React overall is not extremely complicated. There's only so many videos you can make on a tutorial series, and even then, your average React developer won't even have to watch all of it. So essentially, at this point, we are nearing the area where this is becoming intermediate level React, and we've already covered all the fundamentals. So of course, when I'm talking about these concepts, these are going into the more intermediate and advanced concepts. Like this will be used later for something called context. I won't get into that right now, but for now we are doing child props. So you'll see, basically to add them in, you just use the children member variable of props, and that's already built in. So for example, we have our increment button here. So this is the wrong component. We want to look at the increment button. and we want to mess with the child props on this thing. So first of all, since there are no props already being passed, we just have to add the variable. They're always being passed, but we need to actually capture it with this. And then here inside our actual render thing, instead of saying increment, for example, we could change the text maybe. Let's go ahead and keep that, that little semicolon here. And if you remember to inject JavaScript, you already see it over here, you just add in these brackets. And then inside the brackets, I can just say props dot children, just like that. And you'll see it now says hello with this bracket. Now, um, that's because I put this in a paragraph, but I don't have to. I could remove the paragraph just like that. And you'll see now we have hello, or we could put it back to increment, or we could say literally whatever I want to be in the text. I can put whatever I want and it'll show up like that, and just like that. So basically, by using this props.children, we are able to actually use this as normal HTML. This somewhat looks like normal HTML because now we can even embed stuff inside the component. And you can imagine we could have like some super component or some super component. This is not a real component, but we could have some super component, and then inside it, we could have some subcomponent, like we can actually put components inside components, and this can be very powerful if we want to add extra functionality. For example, I'm going to go ahead and create a new component, and of course, as I go through these, I am going quite fast, just because historically my videos already are getting long. I'm already at 6 minutes and 30 seconds, but basically, if you do get stuck or if you don't remember all of the concepts, you can just go back and rewind or go back to the previous episodes. So for example, I'm about to create a component here. I'm not going to talk much about it. I'm just going to make it because I already covered that in a previous episode. So here we're just going to quickly make a fancy border component. I don't know. This is just another example here. And inside, and of course, this folder structure is not mandatory. It's just the folder structure I chose for this project. Really, I can use any folder structure, and I have used various different ones for different projects. It depends on your own needs. So of course, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the fancy border component, which is just a function like that. And then we have to export default, or we can just, export it in some way, however you choose. And then inside here, we're going to go ahead and type return, and then let's go ahead and return let's go ahead and return something with a fancy border. So for example, I'm going to have to pass the props in just like normal. And the first thing we'll do is we'll just say this props.children, just like this, props.children. And just to leaving it like this, oh, whoops. Yeah, so that's one thing. I have to actually wrap this inside something. I have to wrap this inside a div, which just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap props.children inside our div. That way it actually compiles correctly. And over here, I'm going to go ahead and import fancy border. And I have my autocomplete. And then down here under the color toggle button, I'm going to go ahead and create the fancy border here. And we can put whatever we want just inside. So you'll notice now we have some text saying whatever we want. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and remove these two other components just for now, so that we don't, so we only see our own components. So we have whatever we want. And this is inside our fancy border. So now we're going to actually add a fancy border around. And I don't know how fancy it's going to be, but let's go ahead and create a CSS file for this. And then let's go ahead and import it here on the first line. Import /fancy border.css, just to get that up and running. And then of course this div here, which we want to embed with the fancy border, let's go ahead and give it a ID of, or not an ID, but class of fancy dash border. And of course I always forget, but you needed to use class name, not class. And then of course here in fancy border.css, let's go ahead and just say .fancy dash border, and let's give it a border of 1 px dashed white. I don't know. Let's see. So this is a pretty fancy border, I think. And of course, let's just add some padding to make it look a little bit better. And we have whatever we want in here. You'll see we now have a little component that's very reusable. We can put whatever we want inside these fancy borders. So, fancy border 2, whatever we want, but twice. So you'll see now we have a second border. And of course, if we want to add some margin, this is just an example, but we have a component that gives us a fancy border. And of course, as you can see, since we are just under the hood wrapping it in a div, all we can do is, I mean, we can add in, we can make it whatever size we want. This could be an H1 for all we care. It doesn't just have to be regular text. So look, now we have whatever we want but twice, but it's an H1 instead of a paragraph. It can be an H5 or an H4, so slightly smaller. But look at this. So basically, we now have a component that we can reuse multiple times throughout our website. And you'll begin to see that that's kind of the whole point of React, is wrapping these things inside small components or big components, depending on your project. Really, it all depends on your project. But in this case, a small little utility component that just makes life easier. Because now, instead of wrapping every single time, we have to add class equals or class name is equal to fancy dash border, and I have to add that over and over and over and over. Well, that becomes a little hard to read, especially when your website gets really, really big. Well, now you see it right here in big uppercase, fancy border, just like that. And of course, this gets a lot more complicated. Again, I always like to use my site as an example. Oh, I shut that down. Yeah. For example, oh, this is the repository with all of my code in it, by the way. It's just Matthew Lin YT. Um, but if we just take a look at this portfolio site here, I mean, there are lots of examples that I could show. So like if we go into my components folder here, let's look at see, I wrote this when I was learning React. So of course, this is actually not in the best style, I don't think. But for example, let's go ahead and take a look at I want to get the tile sections. Okay, there we go. So companies tiles. So you'll see this is a simple component called companies tiles. And notice I'm importing React here. I actually don't think I have to, but that's just a habit I got when I was learning. But so we have our companies tiles component. It wraps everything in a div with companies section, flex row, flex container, center. These are all classes that I handle for in my SCSS file. And then basically companies I work with, blah, blah, blah. And then there's 3 hover tiles. So let's go ahead and find the definition here. You'll see we have tile sections hover tile.js. This is yet another component that takes in props. And look at that. We take the props.children right here. So basically this component takes in some information. It takes in the children, and then it wraps it inside a div. It adds an image, it adds a paragraph, and then of course it adds the props.children, and you'll see all the information comes from the props itself because I'm doing an object unpack here. So this is some real life React code, and notice when you really look at this, it doesn't look so different from our own code. Of course, this is much simpler, this single component, but I mean, you start looking at our different components, and of course, this doesn't actually look that dissimilar from actual performance or actual production React code. This is what React programming looks like, and basically it is just composing components and adding them together to make a website. Now, this is a little bit shorter actually compared to my other previous like 20-some minute videos, but that's pretty much all I had to show in this video. I just wanted to go over composition, inheritance, React composition, and then using child props, which we covered all of them. So basically, we're going to go ahead and end here at 13 minutes and 30 seconds. So if you want to see more videos like this, I recommend you check out the playlist, which is linked in the description. I'm uploading every 2 days. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications whenever I post new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.